When the captain collapsed from a heart attack during a dangerous storm landing, panicked passengers faced certain death. But the quiet woman in seat 18A wasn't who she seemed. Former military test pilot Maya Rodriguez had the skills to save 147 lives. If anyone would listen to her. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The quiet morning at Chicago O'Hare buzzed with typical energy as passengers boarded Flight 447 to Denver. Maya Rodriguez settled into seat 18A with practiced efficiency, appearing unremarkable in her navy cardigan and jeans. At 38, she had the kind of presence that made others assume she worked in accounting or similar office work. Her paperback mystery novel and preference for window-gazing over conversation marked her as just another forgettable business traveler. Flight attendant Jessica Martinez approached during initial climb, offering beverages with professional courtesy. Maya barely glanced up, requesting water with no ice in a soft voice that suggested someone accustomed to being overlooked. The businessman in 18B, David Patterson, considered making conversation but noted Maya's closed-off body language and decided against it. She seemed like one of those introverted professionals who used flight time for quiet decompression. What none of them knew was Maya's extraordinary background. She had spent 12 years as a military test pilot, pushing experimental aircraft to their absolute limits in conditions that would terrify commercial pilots. Her unassuming demeanor masked years of high-stakes experience where calm competence meant the difference between life and death. She had recovered aircraft from uncontrolled spins at 30,000 feet, landed jets with complete hydraulic failure, and performed emergency procedures from classified military manuals. After retiring as major, Maya had transitioned to civilian aerospace consulting, conducting flight testing on new aircraft designs and training commercial pilots in advanced emergency procedures. Her frequent travel explained her comfort with commercial aviation and ability to spot subtle aircraft performance signs that escaped most passengers. She maintained flight instructor certifications and occasionally taught advanced courses at professional pilot training centers, though she rarely discussed this work with strangers who assumed she held some unremarkable office position. Captain Roberto Martinez announced their cruising altitude over the intercom as they reached 37,000 feet. His voice carried slight tension that Maya noticed, suggesting awareness of challenging conditions ahead. The weather at Denver International Airport was deteriorating faster than meteorologists had predicted, with increasing wind shear conditions and thunderstorm cells building along their intended approach path. 2 hours into the flight, as they began initial descent, Maya felt subtle changes in engine rhythm indicating the autopilot was working harder than normal. Her trained ear detected power fluctuations suggesting moderate turbulence ahead. She closed her mystery novel and focused on flight sensations most travelers ignored: the descent angle, turbulence quality, and barely perceptible engine sound changes that told stories about aircraft performance and atmospheric conditions. The businessman beside her remained absorbed in his laptop presentation, occasionally glancing at cloud formations without recognizing severe weather development signs. Other passengers engaged in typical mid-flight activities while Maya noticed flight attendant Jessica's slightly hurried pace and meaningful glances exchanged with colleagues after cockpit communications. Something was making the crew nervous, though they maintained professional composure. First Officer Jason Williams had been flying commercial jets for 8 years, but today was testing his experience in unexpected ways. Weather at Denver was deteriorating rapidly, with wind shear alerts issued every few minutes and conditions showing wind speeds varying from calm to 30 knots with direction changes up to 60 degrees. Captain Martinez was handling the complexity with steady competence, reviewing approach plates and discussing alternate airports while monitoring weather reports from recently landed aircraft. The cockpit workload increased dramatically as they dealt with deteriorating conditions. Martinez coordinated with dispatch about fuel requirements for possible diversions while briefing Williams on the complex approach they would need if conditions permitted landing at Denver. The instrument landing system approach to runway 16 right would require precise flying in gusty, turbulent conditions with rapidly changing wind patterns demanding constant attention. At 3,000 feet above ground level, with the runway still invisible through thick cloud cover, Captain Martinez focused entirely on the instrument approach when crushing chest pain hit him like a sledgehammer blow. The pain radiated down his left arm with intensity that blurred his vision momentarily. He immediately recognized myocardial infarction symptoms, a massive heart attack shutting down his cardiovascular system with frightening speed. The timing could not have been worse. They were at the most critical flight phase, descending through turbulent air toward an invisible runway, with weather conditions demanding precise flying and constant attention. Martinez felt his strength ebbing, knowing he had only seconds to transfer control before becoming completely incapacitated. "First Officer Williams, you have control," Martinez managed through gritted teeth, voice strained with pain. "Medical emergency, heart attack." The words came in gasps as he slumped forward against his restraints, hands falling away from controls. The aircraft immediately began deviating from approach path as the autopilot struggled to maintain course without constant control inputs the challenging conditions required. Warning chimes began sounding as systems detected deviations from normal flight parameters. Williams felt his blood turn to ice realizing what was happening. The man handling the complex approach with veteran skill was now unconscious beside him, possibly dying, while the aircraft descended toward ground in some of the most challenging weather he had ever encountered. He grabbed controls with suddenly numb hands, keying the microphone with a cracking voice. "Mayday, Mayday, Denver approach, Flight 447 declaring medical emergency," Williams transmitted, fighting for steady voice. "Captain is incapacitated with apparent heart attack. First officer assuming command but requesting immediate assistance and priority handling. We need emergency equipment standing by." Air traffic control responded immediately, trained controllers shifting into emergency mode. "Flight 447, Denver approach, roger your mayday. Medical emergency acknowledged. Emergency equipment rolling to runway 16 right. Can you continue approach or need vectors away from airport for more time?" Williams was discovering his commercial flying experience, mostly relying on autopilot systems, hadn't prepared him for hand-flying a precision approach in severe turbulence while dealing with his captain's collapsed psychological shock. Turbulent conditions Martinez had been handling with veteran skill were pushing Williams beyond his capabilities. Every wind gust required immediate correction, and constantly changing conditions demanded split-second adjustments he was struggling to provide. The aircraft began deviating significantly from ideal approach path, oscillating left and right as Williams overcorrected for gusts, then overcorrected opposite when swinging too far. Maya felt these control inputs and recognized immediately that whoever was flying was behind the aircraft, reacting to problems instead of anticipating them. In severe turbulence, this reactive technique inevitably led to larger deviations becoming increasingly difficult to correct. Maya heard the Mayday call and felt her body respond with automated reactions from years facing countless emergencies in experimental aircraft. Her nervous system shifted into hyper-alert state that had kept her alive through years of test flying dangerous prototypes. While other passengers began panicking as they processed their captain being incapacitated during the most critical flight phase, she was already analyzing the situation from perspective of someone who had spent years recovering aircraft from seemingly impossible situations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Williams announced over intercom, voice betraying enormous stress despite efforts to remain calm, "we're experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit. Captain Martinez has suffered a heart attack and is receiving medical attention. I'm now in command and we're continuing our approach to Denver. I need everyone seated with seatbelts securely fastened. Due to severe weather conditions, this will be a challenging landing, but we're working with air traffic control and have emergency equipment standing by." The aircraft lurched violently left as Williams overcorrected for sudden wind gust, then swung back right as he applied opposite control inputs with too much force. Passengers gasped and several screamed, feeling the aircraft's erratic behavior that immediately told everyone something was seriously wrong in the cockpit. Maya could tell from control responses that Williams was behind the aircraft, making reactive corrections instead of anticipatory ones. In turbulent conditions, this reactive style was rapidly leading them toward flight envelope edges where recovery would become increasingly difficult. The margin for error was shrinking with each passing second as they descended toward ground in unstable atmospheric conditions demanding perfect aircraft control. Passengers throughout the cabin were beginning to understand their situation's gravity as erratic aircraft behavior made clear something was seriously wrong. David Patterson gripped his armrest with white knuckles, business presentation forgotten as he stared at cloud-covered terrain rushing past below. Behind Maya, she heard a woman praying softly in Spanish while her husband tried offering hollow comfort. A child ahead asked his mother in frightened voice why the plane was bouncing so much, and she struggled providing answers that wouldn't increase his terror. Maya Rodriguez unbuckled her seatbelt and stood despite severe turbulence rocking the aircraft, her movements fluid and confident contrasting with fear and uncertainty gripping passengers around her. Years flying experimental aircraft in extreme conditions had given her almost supernatural ability to move smoothly in unstable aircraft, maintaining balance even as the plane bucked and rolled through turbulent air. Flight attendant Jessica immediately noticed the safety violation. "Ma'am, Please return to your seat immediately. We're in an emergency situation and federal regulations require all passengers remain seated with seatbelts fastened. Her voice carried authority of someone trained to maintain order during crises, but Maya was already moving toward the aircraft front with steady gait of someone accustomed to operating in high-stress environments. I need to speak with the first officer immediately, Maya said in calm, clear voice cutting through ambient noise of passenger anxiety, crying children, and overwrought aircraft systems. I'm a former military test pilot with 12 years' experience in emergency aircraft recovery procedures. I have extensive training in experimental aircraft flight testing and advanced emergency landing techniques. I can provide assistance with this emergency situation. The confidence in her voice and precise aviation terminology immediately caught Jessica's attention, convincing her this passenger might actually have the expertise she claimed. Jessica's eyes widened processing this information, recognizing immediately that this quiet passenger who had seemed so unremarkable might be their only hope of surviving the next critical minutes. The cockpit is secured, but I can contact them immediately, Jessica said quickly, reaching for the interphone connecting directly to the flight deck where Williams was struggling with controls and trying to manage an increasingly desperate situation. She had been monitoring cockpit communications and knew Williams was being overwhelmed, making any qualified assistance offer potentially life-saving for everyone aboard. Jessica quickly entered the 6-digit override combination while Maya waited with patient expression of someone who had faced countless crises and knew panic was survival's enemy. The heavy reinforced door swung open revealing Williams hunched over controls, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled maintaining aircraft control while Martinez remained motionless in his seat, breathing shallowly but steadily. Sir, this passenger says she's a former military test pilot with emergency aircraft experience and wants to assist, Jessica announced quickly, voice carrying urgency of someone understanding they were running out of options and time. Williams looked up with desperate expression of someone knowing he was in over his head and willing to accept any available help. The relief in his eyes was immediate and obvious, realizing someone with superior flight experience might help him through the crisis. Maya stepped into the cramped cockpit and immediately began assessing the situation with rapid efficiency from years of emergency response training. Her eyes moved systematically across the instrument panel, taking in airspeed, altitude, heading, power settings, and aircraft configuration in seconds. She noted their deviation from approach path, inconsistent power settings indicating reactive rather than anticipatory flying, and multiple warning lights showing systems operating outside normal parameters. I'm Maya Rodriguez, former Air Force Major, 12 years as test pilot flying experimental aircraft including prototype fighters and advanced research vehicles, she said while continuing to scan instruments and assess flight situation. I have extensive experience with emergency recovery procedures, precision approaches in severe weather, aircraft systems management during multiple failure scenarios, and recovery from unusual flight attitudes. What's your current experience level with hand-flying precision approaches in severe turbulence? The relief in Williams' voice was palpable. 8 years commercial but almost all autopilot flying. I've never had to hand-fly an approach in conditions this severe, especially with multiple emergencies happening simultaneously. The aircraft keeps getting ahead of me and I can't seem to stabilize our approach parameters. Every correction I make seems to make things worse. Maya was already analyzing their current energy state, noting they were high and fast relative to normal approach profile, but still within recoverable parameters if handled correctly. The key in severe turbulence is anticipating the aircraft's behavior instead of reacting to it, she said calmly, slipping into the observer's seat behind pilots. You need to stay ahead of wind shear and power changes. Small, smooth control inputs work much better than large corrections in these conditions. Williams felt immediate relief having someone with superior experience available to guide him through the emergency. Maya's calm competence and obvious expertise were exactly what he needed to regain focus and begin flying proactively instead of reactively. Please talk me through whatever I need to do, he requested. I can feel the aircraft getting away from me. First, reduce power about 10% and lower the nose 2 degrees, Maya instructed, watching flight instruments carefully. We need to get back on stable glide slope before attempting to break through the cloud deck. In turbulence like this, gentle control inputs are much more effective than aggressive corrections. Williams followed her guidance and immediately felt the aircraft become more stable and predictable. Violent oscillations began dampening as he made smaller, more measured control inputs rather than large corrections he had been using. That's much better, he said with obvious relief. The aircraft feels more controllable now. Good. Now watch your airspeed trend indicator rather than just current airspeed, Maya continued. When you see airspeed starting to decay, add power before you actually need it. Anticipate wind shear by staying about 5 knots above target approach speed. The extra airspeed gives you energy to work with when hitting downdrafts. The cloud deck was thicker than forecasted, and they were still in solid instrument conditions at 1,200 feet above ground level. Much lower than normal for breaking out of clouds on precision approach. Maya knew from test pilot experience this kind of low visibility approach in severe turbulence was exactly where things could go wrong quickly if the pilot wasn't prepared for rapid decision-making and precise aircraft control. Flight 447, Denver approach. How are you progressing with the approach? Came concerned voice from air traffic control. They had emergency equipment standing by and were monitoring aircraft progress with growing concern about its unstable flight path and erratic altitude and heading changes. Williams keyed the microphone with significantly more confidence. Denver approach, Flight 447, we have qualified assistance in the cockpit now and aircraft control is improving. We're stabilizing on the approach and request to continue for landing on runway 16 right. Emergency equipment should remain standing by due to captain's medical condition. At 800 feet above ground level, they finally broke through the bottom of cloud deck to see runway lights stretching ahead through rain and gusting wind. But their position was far from ideal. They were left of centerline by about 200 feet, slightly high on glide slope, and the aircraft was being buffeted by severe wind shear requiring constant power adjustments to maintain proper approach speed. I can see the runway but we're way left of centerline, Williams said with growing anxiety. I don't think I can get us lined up properly in time for safe landing. Should I go around and try again? The thought of attempting another approach in these conditions while dealing with captain's medical emergency was terrifying. Maya had been monitoring their position relative to runway and was already formulating recovery plan based on experience with experimental aircraft approaches requiring precision flying in challenging conditions. We can recover from this position using a sidestep maneuver, she said calmly. It's an advanced technique from experimental test flying not typically used in commercial aviation, but it's exactly what we need. Bank right 15 degrees and add 20% power simultaneously. Williams hesitated. This wasn't anything from his commercial pilot training, and seemed counterintuitive to bank steeply so close to ground. But Maya's confidence and obvious expertise were reassuring. He applied the control inputs she requested, feeling aircraft respond immediately to coordinated bank and power increase. The sidestep maneuver required precise coordination of aileron, rudder, and power inputs pushing aircraft to edges of its normal flight envelope, using techniques Maya had learned flying prototype aircraft in conditions never attempted in routine commercial operations. More right rudder to coordinate the turn and prevent a slip, she instructed. Keep the nose pointed at runway threshold while we slide laterally to centerline. At 400 feet above ground level, they were finally aligned with runway centerline, but wind shear was increasing as they descended into surface wind layers where atmospheric turbulence was most severe. Maya could see on instruments they were experiencing rapid changes in wind direction and velocity that would challenge even experienced airline captains. Power up 30% now, Maya called out, seeing airspeed beginning to decay rapidly on instruments. We're hitting a severe downdraft trying to slam us into the ground. Trust the airspeed indicator and ignore what your inner ear tells you about aircraft attitude. This was exactly the counterintuitive response that separated test pilots from conventional pilots. Are you sure about that much power? Williams questioned, knowing excessive power on approach could lead to overshoot or hard landing, both dangerous with wet, slippery runway. But Maya's experience had taught her to trust instruments over conventional wisdom when aircraft performance was being pushed to absolute limits by severe weather. Trust the airspeed and vertical speed indicators, she said firmly, watching instruments carefully. We're experiencing wind shear trying to drop us out of the sky faster than normal descent rates. The extra power is necessary to maintain controlled flight in these conditions. The runway was rushing up now, and Williams could see approach lights clearly through windscreen despite rain and low visibility. But maintaining proper airspeed and glide path in turbulent conditions required constant control inputs, exhausting his concentration and physical strength. Maya continued calling out corrections based on her analysis of aircraft's energy state and position relative to runway. Reduce power slightly and lower the nose 1 degree, she instructed as they passed through 100 feet above runway. We're coming out of wind shear now and getting a little fast. We want to touch down at proper speed to ensure we can stop safely on wet runway. At 50 feet above runway, they encountered sudden downdraft pushing aircraft toward ground faster than normal, creating dangerous situations that had caused numerous accidents when pilots responded incorrectly to wind shear near ground. Williams instinctively pulled back on controls to arrest rapid descent, but Maya quickly countermanded his input with sharp authority. "Power, not attitude," she called out firmly. "Add power to arrest descent rate but keep the nose down to maintain airspeed. If you pull up without adding power, we'll stall and crash." Williams pushed throttles forward and felt engines respond with increased thrust, arresting their rapid descent and stabilizing approach path. The main landing gear touched down firmly but safely on wet runway, and he immediately deployed speed brakes and applied maximum reverse thrust to bring aircraft to stop on slippery surface. Emergency vehicles were already rolling toward them as he turned off at first available taxiway. The relief in cockpit was palpable as they came to complete stop and Williams set parking brake. "Outstanding job," Maya said to him as engines spooled down. "You kept your composure under extremely difficult circumstances and trusted guidance from someone you'd never met before. That takes real professionalism and courage. You saved a lot of lives today." Williams was still shaking slightly from adrenaline rush and emotional stress, but knew that without Maya's expertise and calm guidance, the outcome could have been tragically different. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't know what would have happened without your help. You saved this flight." Emergency medical technicians boarded within minutes to attend Captain Martinez, who was conscious again but clearly needed immediate cardiac care. The heart attack had been severe, but the successful landing had given him chance for proper medical treatment. EMTs worked quickly to stabilize him before transferring to waiting ambulance. Maya provided brief statement to Federal Aviation Administration investigators who arrived to document the emergency, emphasizing Williams' professionalism under extreme pressure and effectiveness of crew resource management techniques when properly applied during crisis situations. She explained the advanced flight testing techniques they had used, noting that while unconventional for commercial aviation, they were essential for recovery from extreme conditions they had encountered. The passengers erupted in spontaneous applause, realizing they were safely on ground and that the quiet woman they had barely noticed during flight had just played a crucial role in saving all their lives. Flight attendant Jessica stopped Maya with tears in her eyes as she made her way back toward seat 18A. "Thank you," Jessica said simply, voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened without your help." Maya simply nodded and collected her carry-on bag and paperback novel, having no interest in media attention or recognition for what she considered simply doing what needed to be done. The businessman from 18B, David Patterson, shook her hand firmly and thanked her profusely, finally understanding that the quiet woman he had barely acknowledged was far from ordinary. As passengers deplaned and shared stories with anxiously waiting family members, Maya Rodriguez quietly made her way through airport toward her connecting flight to Colorado Springs, where she had a consulting appointment the following morning. She had no desire to speak with news media representatives already gathering to cover the story, preferring to maintain the anonymity that had served her well throughout her transition from military to civilian life. The investigation that followed revealed the combination of severe weather, medical emergency, and challenging aircraft control issues had created what aviation safety experts called a perfect storm of factors that would have overwhelmed most pilots. Maya's unique background in experimental aircraft testing had provided exactly the skills needed to guide the approach, using techniques not taught in commercial aviation but essential for recovery from extreme situations. Williams would later tell investigators that Maya Rodriguez's calm expertise and advanced flight testing knowledge had been the difference between successful emergency landing and potential catastrophe. Her ability to remain focused under extreme pressure while providing clear, actionable guidance had transformed rapidly deteriorating situation into textbook example of crew resource management during crisis. The techniques Maya had used during emergency approach would eventually be incorporated into advanced pilot training programs for situations involving severe weather and emergency conditions. Her calm competence under pressure demonstrated the value of experimental flight testing experience in preparing pilots for situations beyond routine commercial aviation operations boundaries. 6 months later, Maya Rodriguez remained the same quiet, unremarkable passenger that flight attendants and fellow travelers had always assumed her to be. She continued flying frequently for aerospace consulting work, reading paperback novels and preferring window seats where she could observe the world while monitoring flight operations with trained eye of someone who understood aviation complexities in ways most passengers never would. The quiet competence that had made her nearly invisible to casual observers during routine flights was exactly the quality that had enabled her to perform under pressure when lives depended on split-second decisions and unconventional thinking. In a world where heroes were often loud and dramatic, Maya Rodriguez proved that sometimes the most extraordinary capabilities came in the most ordinary packages, waiting quietly in seat 18A for the moment when years of specialized training and experience would be needed to save lives. Captain Martinez made a full recovery after triple bypass surgery, returning to flying 6 months later with new appreciation for the fragility of life and the importance of crew resource management. He would later seek out Maya to thank her personally, finding her at an aerospace conference in Phoenix where she was presenting research on advanced flight envelope protection systems. Their conversation was brief but meaningful, two professionals who understood the thin line between routine operations and life-threatening emergencies. The Federal Aviation Administration conducted an extensive investigation into Flight 447, interviewing all crew members and key passengers multiple times. Maya's detailed debriefing provided insights into experimental flight testing techniques that were subsequently incorporated into commercial pilot training curricula. Her calm recollection of events, precise technical language, and complete absence of ego impressed even veteran FAA investigators who had seen countless emergency situations over their careers. First Officer Williams underwent additional training in severe weather operations and manual flight skills, recognizing that his over-reliance on automation had nearly proved catastrophic. The airline implemented new training requirements emphasizing hand-flying skills and decision-making under pressure, using Flight 447 as a case study in the importance of maintaining fundamental piloting abilities even in an age of advanced automation. Williams would eventually upgrade to captain, carrying with him the lessons learned during those terrifying minutes over Denver. The National Transportation Safety Board's final report on Flight 447 praised the successful outcome while highlighting systemic issues in commercial pilot training. The report noted that many commercial pilots had become overly dependent on automated systems, lacking the manual flying skills necessary to handle extreme emergency situations. Maya's intervention was cited as an example of how specialized knowledge from military and experimental flight testing could provide critical capabilities not found in standard commercial training programs. Aviation safety experts studied the incident extensively, particularly focusing on Maya's use of advanced energy management techniques and non-standard approaches that weren't taught in civilian pilot training. Her sidestep maneuver during the final approach became a subject of particular interest, demonstrating how experimental flight testing techniques could be adapted for commercial aviation emergencies. Several airlines began incorporating modified versions of these techniques into their advanced pilot training programs. The story of Flight 447 spread throughout aviation circles, becoming legendary among pilots, flight instructors, and aviation safety professionals. Maya's role was discussed in professional forums and training seminars as an example of how diverse experience and unconventional thinking could save lives when standard procedures weren't adequate. Her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure while providing clear, actionable guidance became a model for crew resource management training programs worldwide. Flight attendant Jessica Martinez requested a transfer to Maya's usual routes, hoping to fly with her again and learn from her calm competence under pressure. Though Maya rarely engaged in conversation during flights, Jessica noticed how she observed everything: engine sounds, flight patterns, crew interactions, and passenger behavior, with the trained eye of someone who understood aviation at a level most people never would. Their occasional brief conversations revealed depths of knowledge that continually surprised Jessica. David Patterson, the businessman from seat 18B, completely changed his perspective on fellow travelers after witnessing Maya's extraordinary intervention. He began engaging more thoughtfully with people around him, recognizing that remarkable capabilities often existed in the most unlikely packages. His business presentations now included anecdotes about the importance of recognizing hidden expertise and the value of remaining humble about one's assumptions regarding others. The media attention surrounding Flight 447 eventually died down, but aviation enthusiasts continued discussing the incident online and in professional publications. Maya declined all interview requests, preferring to let the official investigation reports speak for themselves. Her decision to maintain privacy only added to her mystique within aviation circles, where she became known as the ghost pilot, someone who appeared when needed most, then disappeared back into anonymity. Maya's consulting business grew significantly after Flight 447, as aerospace companies recognized the value of her unique combination of experimental flight testing experience and real-world emergency management capabilities. She began working with major aircraft manufacturers on flight envelope protection systems, helping design automated safety features that would prevent pilots from inadvertently entering dangerous flight conditions. Her insights from both military test flying and the Flight 447 emergency proved invaluable in developing systems that could assist pilots during extreme situations. The aircraft involved in Flight 447 underwent extensive inspection and analysis, with engineers studying every component to understand how it had performed during the emergency. The data from the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder provided valuable insights into aircraft behavior during severe weather encounters and emergency situations. This information contributed to improvements in aircraft design, pilot training, and emergency procedures that would benefit countless future flights. Maya continued her quiet existence, traveling frequently for consulting work while maintaining the same unremarkable appearance that had served her so well throughout her career transition. She still preferred Seat 18A when possible, still read paperback mystery novels, and still observed the world passing by through small oval windows while monitoring flight operations with the expertise that had saved 147 lives over Denver. Her military decorations remained packed away, her heroism hidden beneath layers of deliberate ordinariness. Years later, when aviation historians compiled accounts of significant emergency landings in commercial aviation, Flight 447 would be remembered not just for the successful outcome, but for demonstrating how extraordinary expertise could emerge from the most unexpected sources. Maya Rodriguez had proved that heroes didn't need to announce themselves or seek recognition. Sometimes they simply sat quietly in Seat 18A, reading mystery novels and waiting for the moment when years of specialized training would be called upon to save lives. The lessons learned from Flight 447 continued reverberating through the aviation industry long after the emergency itself had become history. Training programs evolved to emphasize the importance of manual flying skills, crew resource management, and the value of accepting assistance from qualified individuals regardless of their official roles. Maya's calm competence under extreme pressure became the gold standard for emergency response, studied and emulated by pilots, instructors, and safety professionals worldwide. In the end, Flight 447 served as a powerful reminder that in aviation, as in life, the most extraordinary capabilities often existed in the most ordinary packages. Maya Rodriguez had demonstrated that true expertise was measured not by titles or recognition, but by the ability to perform when lives hung in the balance, using whatever skills and knowledge were necessary to bring everyone home safely.